Hey everyone, this is Jungkook. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. I was walking out of a back entrance after a long night, the kind of night when the lights go down, but the noise stays inside your head. And I thought I could slip into the quiet without anyone noticing. My voice was raw. Not from singing, but from all the small conversations that take more energy than a stadium chorus. And my hands were tucked into my jacket like I was trying to protect something small and trembling under the fabric. I wanted a single, ordinary moment with the dark in the air and the feeling that I could belong to myself again. Then a phone lit up in the corner near the stairwell, and a face turned toward me with that look I know too well. The eager light that says, I know you. I want a piece of you. I deserve a moment with you. I said I needed to go home. I said I needed to sleep. He said it would take 2 seconds. He said it was the least I could do after all the years of support. That word hung between us like a receipt. I don't want to talk about what happened next because it was small and messy and not the point. I want to talk about the feeling that lingered after, the tremor that stayed in my hands even after the car door closed, the quiet accusation I turned inward, the same one I always reach for when I put my needs before someone else's. Maybe you were rude, maybe you are ungrateful, maybe you are the wrong kind of person for wanting a private life, maybe you don't deserve a future that belongs to you. I stared at the mirror and watched the city smear into strips of white and red and told myself to breathe. The driver said nothing. He didn't have to. The silence was a kindness. It let me hear the real conversation, the one I was having with the part of me that apologizes for existing. I've been thinking about what a future means when thousands of eyes are on you. When love is measured in numbers and numbers are turned into a debt you're told you can never pay. It's strange to talk about love after a night like that, but love is what I kept circling back to. Love as a practice, love as a promise, love as a boundary. I want to talk about my girlfriend, and I want to talk about my plans with her, and I want to talk about how those plans keep colliding with the expectations of people who mean well until they don't. I want a life where I can make breakfast in a quiet kitchen and laugh about how the eggs are never as pretty as the photos, where I can sit on the floor and fold laundry while a song I haven't finished yet plays low in the background, where I can place my phone face down and let time belong to us for an hour without explanation. This is simple. This is radical. I know some people will hear this and say, but what about us? What about the years of support? What about the way we held you up when you were tired? What about the nights we stayed up for a release? The birthdays we celebrated? The projects we pushed? I hear you. I carry that with me every time I walk on stage. I see signs that took all afternoon to paint, and I know the ink stained your fingers. I remember the chill of dawn at the airport and the way you still smiled. But support is not a key to my door, and love is not a tax. Support is belief offered freely, and when it turns into a past that grants access to every moment, it isn't support anymore. It's a claim. It's a demand. It's a story where I don't get to be a person. I become a machine that dispenses moments on request. When I told a friend what happened tonight, he reminded me of something I'm almost embarrassed to admit. I forget. Boundaries are not fences around selfishness. They are the shape of love that lasts. If I say yes to every request, I am giving away the hours I need to become someone worth saying yes to in the first place. If I let guilt lead me by the wrist, I will arrive everywhere except the place I promised to build with the person I love. I want to be the kind of man who can show up without resentment, who can cook dinner slowly, who can say no when he's empty, so the yes that comes later is honest and alive. I want to be the kind of partner who can step back from noise and step toward someone's eyes and say, I'm here fully, not as a performance, but as a person. I thought about the members as a car hummed under the city's skin. RM would probably tilt his head and turn this into a question about stewardship. What does it mean to steward the life you've been given, not just a career? He'd pour a little coffee, look out a window, and remind me that protecting your mind is a form of gratitude, not defiance. Jin would joke first, lighten the room, tell me my face still looks fine, because I'm devastatingly handsome and should stop worrying. And then, when the laughter fades, his eyes would soften and he'd say it straight. Choose the home you want and build it brick by brick. Yoongi would listen longer than anyone else, his silence like a blanket. And then he'd say one sentence that feels like a lever yanked inside my chest. You can't edit your life for strangers and expect the people you love to read the uncut version. Hobie would take me outside into the daylight and ask me to breathe until the world got big again, until the night shrank back to its true size. One page in a book that has more chapters than I can count. Jimin would squeeze my shoulder in that way that says, I'm with you no matter what. And he'd remind me that love is loudest when you let it be quiet. Taeyoung would play a chord on the guitar, something warm, and say the future is a room with a door that stays closed unless you choose to open it. And not every knock is an invitation. I used to think that the right thing to do was always the generous thing that made other people happiest in the moment. I didn't notice how quickly my calendar turned into a schedule of other people's relief. I didn't notice how often my yes came from fear of being misunderstood rather than a desire to give. I didn't notice the way I held my breath when I reached for my phone. Nobody teaches you to manage the collision of intimacy and scale. One person's request is human, a hand extended with hope. 1,000 hands extended at once can feel like you're being lifted and pulled apart at the same time. You are grateful and you are tired. You are honored and you are a little scared of how easily you can disappear inside the very love that made everything possible. So I've been writing down the things I want to promise, the kind of promises that don't belong on billboards. I want to promise that I will show up to my life on purpose. I want to promise that I will build mornings that belong to us, the kind where I can make the kind of coffee that takes too long and doesn't make sense when there's a crowded schedule waiting, the kind where our shoes by the door mean we went for a walk and let the world be just a street and a sky. I want to promise that I will not hold my future hostage to the fear of being called selfish. I want to promise that I will treat my love not as a rumor to be explained or defended, but as a garden to be tended, a practice that grows in quiet repetition. I want to promise the members that I will take care of myself so that what we make together keeps its shine. Not the cosmetic kind, but the kind that comes from work done with a clean heart. I want to promise you that when we meet on a stage, in a song, in a moment I've prepared with everything I have, you will feel the honesty of a man who knows where home is. Sometimes I imagine what a simple day could be. We sleep in a little. The blinds let in that thin slice of morning that looks like a path drawn across the wall. There's a playlist running that has demos I'm not ready to share, and she laughs at the way I wince when a note slides a little sharp, and I laugh at the way she knows exactly when I'm about to restart the track. We talk about groceries like it's the world's most important meeting, and then forget half the list because we end up holding peaches and arguing about which one smells more like summer. I picked the quietest table in the cafe, and my back finds the wall out of habit, but I don't watch the door as much as I used to. I let my shoulders drop. I call my mom just to tell her I'm making something new and that it's strange and I don't know if anyone will like it. I send a message to the members about a line that won't sit still until Hobie sends back a voice note that turns the line into a dance. On days like that, the future isn't a headline. It's a series of small permissions I grant myself without apology. I keep asking myself why guilt shows up when I protect those days. Who taught me that a good man is a man who never says no? That a grateful artist is one who never puts down the pen? That love given to millions must always outrank the love given to one person sitting across the table? When did we forget that the only way to keep giving is to stop sometimes, to let the well refill in the sun, to walk away from the noise without writing an essay that defends the right to breathe? I refuse to make my life a courtroom where every boundary is evidence of betrayal. I refuse to pretend that exhaustion is noble and numbness is professional. I want to feel the music again in my bones, not as an obligation, but as a joy that rises when I have slept and cooked and listened and built the kind of quiet where melodies dare to knock. There's a story some people will tell about me after nights like this. They'll say I turned cold. They'll say I forgot the people who lifted me up. They'll say I hid behind tinted glass and the word privacy like it was a shield. Maybe they need that story to make sense of their disappointment. Maybe I needed that story once to make sense of my fear. But here's the truth. I'm learning to hold without shaking. I'm not turning away from you. I'm turning toward a life that lets me meet you with a real smile. I'm not closing the door to be cruel. I'm closing it so that when it opens, I can walk through it as myself and not a ghost who learned to imitate the shape of a man. I am not choosing between love that is public and love that is private. I am choosing to honor both by letting each keep its proper place. I know there will be times when it will be hard. There will be cameras where there should be quiet. There will be a hand on my shoulder at an airport when all I want is to send a message that says I'm home soon. There will be a day when a rumor grows teeth and tries to chew through the simplest joy. On those days, I'll remember what the members said in their own ways. Steward your mind, build your home. Don't edit the truth for strangers. Breathe until the sky is big. Stay close. I'm with you. Choose which knocks to answer. I will remember the kitchen light. I will remember the laundry song. I will remember the peaches. I will remember the door that opens because I chose it, not because I was too tired to keep it closed. I don't have a neat conclusion, no plot twist that solves the tension between being known and being free. I have something better, a practice I'm willing to keep. I will keep learning to say no with kindness and without guilt. I will keep learning to say yes with presence and without fear. I will keep naming what I want out loud so it stops being a secret I feel ashamed of. And what I want is simple and the bravest thing I know. To build a future with the woman I love in a way that lets both of us stay human. I want to cook slowly. I want to write songs that sound like mornings. I want to tour because I'm full, not because I'm running from emptiness. I want to come back to you with work that carries fingerprints from a life lived, not a life performed to exhaustion. I want to walk out of a door at night and belong to myself long enough to get home safe. And when I stand under those lights again and hear that first wave of sound rise up like the ocean deciding to breathe, I will think of how many of you learned in your own lives to set a boundary and survive the judgment that followed. I will think of how that courage is a kind of rhythm, how it keeps time for the rest of us. I will think of how love that is offered freely does not ask for proof at midnight. I will sing like gratitude is not a debt but a horizon, and I will go home afterward and keep my promise. And in the morning the blinds will make their path across the wall, and the coffee will take too long, and the song will be almost right, and the future will be exactly as radical and ordinary as we dared to make it. The morning after that kind of night always carries a strange quiet, like the city forgot to put its armor back on and the streets are showing a softer face. Only the early walkers get to see, and that's where I try to put myself into the soft part of the day where the air is cooler than your thoughts and the sky hasn't chosen a mood yet. I made coffee slowly and watched the steam rise like a patient rehearsal, and I told myself I would not spend this morning answering ghosts at the door. I would spend it answering the person sitting across from me in my head, the one I love, the one I'm building something with, the one whose name I keep tucked between my teeth, like a promise I don't want the world to chew. There's a version of my life where I am always on moving from obligation to obligation, like stepping stones thrown across a river. And there's another version where I build a house on the bank and learn the rhythm of the water so I can cross when the day is right and the light is kind. I want the second version. I want the slow house. I want to wake up and feel the floor warm beneath my feet because we remembered to put the rug there, because details are how people stay. Because the future isn't a headline you drop, it's the way you remember someone takes their tea. It's a song you don't release because it belongs to the kitchen, not the stage. Sometimes I think the hardest part isn't the request itself. It's how I have trained myself to meet it. How my body leans forward before my mind has arrived. How my mouth shapes, yes, like it's the default vowel of my life. I keep learning how to create the pause, the breath that lets me decide instead of react. The moment where I ask, Does this serve what I'm building, or does it set fire to it because I'm afraid to be misunderstood? I looked at my calendar and saw the way a week can turn into a maze if I'm not careful. And I imagined the two of us trying to walk through it with a basket of groceries and a plan to cook, only to be stopped at every corner by the noise that says, prove it, prove your gratitude, prove your love, prove your worth. Gratitude that demands proof is not gratitude. It is a test with no right answers. Love that must be broadcast every hour is not love. It is surveillance dressed as devotion. I want to live in a world where I'm allowed to give the best of me on purpose, not the leftovers of me by accident. I message the members like I always do when the inside of my head starts to echo and I need other rooms to stand in for a while. And they answered like they always do, each in their own voice that I could pick out blindfolded. Namjoon sent me a line from a book and then apologized for being too professor. But I smiled because sometimes you need a sentence to hold like a handrail, and his was saying what I needed to hear. There is no sustainable gift that doesn't flow from a protected source. Seokjin sent a photo of breakfast shaped like a joke, a face made of eggs and toast, and I laughed until the coffee tasted brighter. Then he followed with a message that was not a joke at all. Take the time to become the husband you want to be. There's no trophy for speed, only regrets for rushing. Yoongi sent a voice note that started with a few seconds of silence and a sigh, and then he said, write it out and sing it when you're ready. The people who love you will hear it in the quiet, even if the crowd is loud. Hoseok sent a clip of sunlight on the studio floor and typed, let the day touch your skin before the phone touches your hand. And I felt something unclench inside my chest. Jimin wrote, I'm proud of you for saying what you need. And I read it twice because sometimes the thing you most need is permission to be exactly who you just were. Taeyoung sent a chord progression that felt like a doorway swinging open, and he added, choose which rooms get music and which rooms get silence. Both are holy if you honor them. I walked through the apartment and pictured it as the place where we'll make a life small enough to hold and strong enough to stand storms. And I thought about all the times I tried to make love big and loud so the world could see it and call it real, and how often the loudness is what breaks things, not the silence. I want to learn the daily measurements of tenderness. 1 extra minute of listening at the table, 1 apology that arrives before pride wakes up, 1 sticky note on a mirror that says, I saw the way you handled a hard day, and I love the way you held it without letting it hold you. I want to place my phone face down when she tells me about the plans she has for later, not because I'm a saint, but because I remember the nights when I beg the world to treat me like a person and I have to answer my own prayers first. If I want a future that is ordinary in the most miraculous ways, I have to defend the ordinary from the extraordinary's appetite. And that means I will disappoint people who have built a map of me that only leads to a stage. There's a kind of guilt that wears your own name like an imitation. It sounds exactly like your voice, but it speaks from fear. And I'm getting better at noticing the difference. The fake voice wants me to make an announcement every time I choose a private joy, to present paperwork listing good deeds that balance the selfishness of rest, to call my mother and ask if she still approves, to call my brothers and ask if I have their permission, to call the fandom and ask if they think I'm still worthy, to call the mirror and ask if the man there still looks like the boy who promised everything. The true voice is quieter, which is why it's harder to hear in a room full of applause. But when the day is still, it tells me things I can stand on. Work is long and love is longer. Applause is loud and home is deeper. Generosity is a river that needs shores or it becomes a flood. I wrote those lines down because I needed them to belong somewhere other than my head. And then I stood at the sink and washed a couple of mugs. Like the act itself could be a lesson, I keep forgetting. Caring for small things is not small. After lunch, I went to the studio with the intention to make something only for us. And I mean us in the most selfish and generous way. Me and the person I love, me and the members who will listen with their own hearts, me and the future version of myself who will forget unless Present Me leaves him a trail of sound to follow. I built a beat that felt like late morning and wrote a melody that refuses to hurry. and I let my voice sit in its low place. Because that's where it feels honest when I'm talking about choosing a life rather than proving one. There's an old habit in me that wants to turn everything into performance. And I don't hate that part, because it kept me alive in rooms that would have swallowed me whole. But I asked it to stand to the side for an hour, while the part of me that knows the smell of peaches and the exact weight of her hand on my sleeve takes the mic. I kept the lights dim and the air just a little cold, because music breathes better when it has room to run. On the drive home, I thought about airports, because that's where the collisions usually happen. A place designed for departures that somehow ends up asking you to arrive for everyone, all at once, without falling apart. I remembered a night when a hand reached out from a crowd and brushed my shoulder. Not hard, but in that particular way that says, my desire is the only law I'm obeying right now. And I felt a flash of anger that tasted like fear, because I don't want to become the kind of person who assumes the worst. I want to keep the soft focus, the benefit of the doubt, the belief that people are better than their worst impulse. But I also want to live long enough to hold a child of my own one day and show him or her that a life can be built from the inside out. I don't want the lesson they learn from me to be that you only deserve love if you share it with everyone equally all the time. I want the lesson to be that love knows how to choose its scale, and that choosing a smaller audience is sometimes the bravest form of honesty. In the evening, I called my parents and listened to memories I've heard a dozen times, because repetition is a language families speak when they're trying to tell you what matters. My mother told me how my grandmother would stop stirring the soup to stand at the window and watch the weather change. How that pause was a ritual that made the meal taste like home. My father reminded me that music kept our house together when money didn't want to. How a cheap speaker on a counter can hold a whole family in its tiny hands if the right song is playing. I want to take those stories and turn them into practices. Stop what you're doing and notice the day. Let songs guard the room you're in. Keep the door shut sometimes, so you know the difference between sanctuary and publicity. We didn't talk about headlines. We didn't talk about rumors. We talked about soup and speakers and the way a life gets built with things you can't fit into a post. Later, I walked with her down a street where no one recognized us, because everyone was busy being a person with their own bags and worries and small joys. And I realized how rare and generous that anonymity felt, like stepping into a clear lake after weeks of heat. We talked about a future dog we might get and who would actually walk him in the rain. And we argued about names in the kind of way that feels like rehearsal for decisions that matter. And our hands kept finding each other without asking permission from any camera. I told her the truth. I had finally said out loud to myself that morning, I can't promise I'll be available to everyone whenever they ask, but I can promise I'll be fiercely available to this life we're building. She didn't ask me to prove it. She just squeezed my fingers once, like a stamp you press into soft wax, and said, then let's live like that. Back home, I opened my messages, because that's part of the life I chose and the work I love. And I saw so many notes from people telling me about the first time they learned to say no and survived the storm that followed. And I felt that old guilt tilt a little in its chair, like maybe it had lost the argument this round. I wrote back where I could and read quietly where I couldn't. And I let the compassion I asked for flow the other way too, toward the ones who are still learning that support is not a key, that cheering is not a contract, that love for an artist is best when it allows the artist to still be a person. I know there will be nights that don't end the way I hope. I know there will be days that require public proof that I wish I could refuse. But if I keep choosing this practice, slow coffee, honest music, soft boundaries stated firmly, family stories, street walks where we belong only to ourselves, I believe I can meet you with work that is warmer and meet her with a heart that is not exhausted from proving itself to strangers. Before bed, I stood at the window and watched the city act like the ocean again, waves of light and shadow, and I let myself imagine the house we'll make inside this moving world. A room where a guitar leans and a kettle hums, and the blinds draw lines on the wall that shift with the hour. I imagine dinners that run late, because we keep telling stories, And mornings that start early because we want one more page of the life we're reading together. I imagine calling the members to come by with whatever they're working on, and all of us listening, and nobody worrying about whether the doorbell cameras caught the arrival, because some nights the world does not need to know the address of our joy. I let that picture stay until my breathing matched it. I promised myself I would defend it without apology. And when I turned off the light, the quiet didn't feel like absence anymore. It felt like everything I had been too busy to hear settling into place where it belongs, waiting for tomorrow to arrive slowly, the way a future should. The day stretched wide and quiet in the way that makes you think time might actually be elastic if you treat it gently. And I used that give to map a future I could carry without dropping pieces of myself along the way. I wrote dates on a calendar that isn't public. The kind with pencil marks and smudges where plans become more real than rumors. And I circle the days that would belong to family, because family days don't survive unless you defend them with something stronger than good intention. I kept seeing a kitchen table with mismatched chairs and a vase that keeps giving the same 3 flowers different angles of light. And I decided that the first promise I owe the life I want is to keep that table clear enough for a conversation that doesn't have to raise its voice to be heard. There is music in that kind of order, the low, steady rhythm you can layer anything on top of without losing the beat, and I want my work to sit on it, not consume it. It's not about shrinking what I give to the world. It's about growing a foundation that can hold what the world keeps asking me to carry. In the afternoon, I met the members, because there are thoughts that don't know what they're trying to become until they touch a room where those 6 familiar energies live. I walked in with a melody that tasted like morning toast and winter sunlight, and the way Namjoon tilted his head told me he heard the thesis before the words arrived. Make the chorus a boundary disguised as gratitude. Jin knocked the side of the table twice in that playful way that hides a craftsman's certainty, and made a counter melody that found the seam where hope and realism shake hands. Yoongi sat back and built a drum pattern that leaves space in all the right corners, so the lines about choosing a smaller, deeper life could land without armor. Hoseok moved as if the song were already out in the world. 3 steps ahead of the rhythm, but somehow perfectly on time. And I watched how his body translated self-respect into something you could learn with your feet. Jimin hummed a thread of harmony that closed the distance between what I want to say and what I'm brave enough to admit. A reminder that intimacy has a sound when you protect it. Taeyoung slid a warm guitar under everything, like he was laying down a welcome mat that says this home opens to those who knock with kindness. We didn't talk about markets or metrics. We talked about Sunday soups and windows that face the right direction, and the way a human voice changes when it's singing for someone who knows how you take your tea. The track deepened without growing heavy, and I felt the same relief you feel when a door that has stuck for years suddenly swings true on its hinges. Later, on a drive through streets that looked like they had been rinsed clean by a sky that finally remembered how to cry, I tested a thought I've been afraid to say aloud. A future with my girlfriend is not a rumor to silence or a spectacle to feed. It is a craft. Craft is slow, intentional, and repetitive in the best way. It involves learned motions that become second nature, because you've honored them long enough for muscle memory to carry them when willpower is tired. Craft is knowing which moments deserve to be framed and which moments need to live unrecorded, so they can breathe. I imagined us practicing the craft of a life the way you practice a song, not to impress an audience, but to be changed by the discipline of showing up for each other until the notes that used to wobble find their center. That vision holds even on nights when the crowd follows you past the exit and the clearest thought you have is leave. Because the craft teaches you to return. Return to the kitchen, return to the table, return to the hands that steady you, return to the promise that you are allowed to belong to yourself before you belong to the noise. A message came through from someone who said they had supported me since the beginning, and that support entitles them to every corner of my day. And for a moment, the old reflex woke up, the one that drafts, long explanations, and proof of goodness and receipts that total up to worthiness. But then I remembered the sentence I wrote on a card and taped above my desk. Generosity without boundaries is extraction, wearing a friendly mask. I let the message sit without letting it sit on me. I pictured all of the faces I've seen in crowds. The ones who have cried in the third row because a lyric found the exact bruise it needed to touch. The ones who carried each other across long nights with the chorus looped until morning. And I knew those people are not the demand. They are the echo of something we built together that still belongs to both of us, precisely because neither of us tried to own it. That difference matters. And the future I want depends on honoring it without apology. Back at home, I laid out a small dinner with the kind of care you save for projects you believe in. Not because the ingredients were impressive, but because I wanted the table to understand it was part of a larger architecture. I thought about a dog-eared page in a notebook where I wrote the plainest sentence I could make. A good day is a day you can describe without performance. Today I could write, I cooked rice, I salted the soup, I sent a song to my brothers. I called my parents. I laughed with the woman I love about the shape of a cloud that looked like a sleeping cat. None of that is content. All of it is context. And context is what lets me stand on a stage without shaking, what lets me pick a camera out of a crowd and see a person holding it, not a claim being staked on my body. If I keep building context, the work stays human. If I chase content at the expense of context, the work becomes empty even when it's loud. Night thickened, and with it came the old specter of airports and after parties and alleys behind venues where a single choice can turn into a headline, so I rehearsed the version of that moment I want to live by. I imagined a hand reaching toward me and a voice asking for a photo. And I imagined myself saying no with a smile that isn't an apology, a tone that isn't defensive, a pace that isn't hurried by shame. I imagined walking on without writing the trial brief in my head. I imagined arriving home earlier because I chose to, and finding her reading with her feet tucked under a blanket we argued about buying because it was too expensive, and now we both agree it was worth more than its price. I imagined kissing her temple and sitting down without a speech about the day. Just the kind of silence that says everything, the way an open window says everything about the air. This is a choreography I want to master. The one where dignity and kindness aren't rivals. The one where love doesn't need to explain why it doesn't want to be photographed brushing its teeth at midnight. I opened the window and called the city by its first name, like it was an old friend who had overstayed but whose stories I still love. And I asked it to keep my secrets the way it keeps millions, not out of malice, but out of sheer abundance. In that air, I could hear the rehearsal room again. The way each member's instinct had found a shape that let my own clarity take root. I thought of Namjoon's sentence about sustainable gifts and realized a gift without renewal becomes a burden. I thought of Jin's quiet insistence that there is no trophy for speed and realized most of my regrets came from trying to outrun misunderstanding. I thought of Yoongi's empty bars, the spaces he leaves on purpose. And I decided my calendar needs visible blanks I refuse to fill. I thought of Hoseok's sunlight clip and promised to let daylight touch my skin before my phone does whenever I can. I thought of Jimin's simple pride and chose to believe that the self I was this week deserved a soft place to land. I thought of Taeyoung's doorway chord and decided some rooms in my life will remain invitation only forever. Not because I'm hiding something ugly, but because beauty rots under constant inspection. Before sleep, I took out a small box that isn't the box yet, but could be a place to test the weight of a decision by letting it rest in my palm. I traced circles with my thumb the way you do when you're learning a new instrument. And I pictured the future not as a proposal in front of a lens, but as 1,000 tiny agreements signed in the margins of ordinary days. Say yes to breakfast together on Tuesdays, even when Monday ran long. Say yes to meeting in the middle on the song that matters to both of us for different reasons. Say yes to walking away from arguments that are actually about fatigue and returning to them like grown people who slept and drank water. Say yes to telling the truth before gossip tells a version that costs too much to correct. Say yes to disappearing for a weekend into a town where no one cares who we are so we can remember who we are. If I collect enough of those agreements, A single ring starts to look like the right punctuation instead of a headline to manage. When I turned out the lights, the room held its breath in that way. That makes you feel like you're inside a held note at the end of a concert. The kind where no one wants to break the spell. And I recognize the feeling as the exact opposite of the way last night began. That symmetry felt like forgiveness, not of anyone else, but of the part of me that still believes peace must be justified. I am learning that peace is not a verdict. It is a practice. I am learning that love is not a press release. It is a room. I am learning that the future is not something I owe to strangers. It is something I owe to the people whose names I say softly, and the self I live with when the lights go out. As I fell asleep, I promised to carry that learning into the morning and the next rehearsal and the next crowded exit and the next quiet dinner and the next line I write over and over until it stops wobbling. I promise to keep the table clear. I promise to keep the chorus true. I promise to keep the door locked when it needs to be and wide open when it's time to step out and sing. Like gratitude is a horizon, not a debt. The week didn't announce itself with drama. It came in like a careful whisper, the kind that brushes your shoulder and asks if you're ready to keep a promise you've only admitted to yourself in small rooms. I woke before the alarm because the body learns its own bells when the mind is carrying something delicate, and I lay there watching the ceiling learn the color of morning, thinking about how many lives a single day has and how easily the loudest one tries to swallow the other. I told myself I would not let that happen today. I told myself this day would have 3 lives at least. The life I give to the stage, the life I give to the people who know how my laughter actually sounds when there's no microphone, and the life I give to the future I'm building with the woman who has taught me to sit still long enough to hear the part of my heart that never shouts. By the time the kettle sang, I had already written a few lines that might never make it into a chorus. Sentences that felt like bricks I could stack into something load-bearing. One was so simple it felt like it had been waiting for me to notice it. Intimacy is a schedule. It's not an emergency or an accident. It's a calendar that knows your true priorities and refuses to apologize for them. I thought about all the hours I've given to machines, to metrics, to screens that want to be fed like living things, and how easy it is to place those demands above the very life they're supposed to amplify. If I want a love that breathes past the headline, I have to give it oxygen on purpose. So I sat with my notebook and wrote the dates that are no one's business but ours, the small holidays we invented, the Tuesday mornings that mean more to me than any after party, the afternoons I promised her we would guard even when the sky outside is screaming for content. The studio called to me in that soft way it does when the room is ready and the song has decided it will not bite today. I walked the hall with my cap low and my mind open, one hand brushing the paint chips on the wall where the years have announced themselves, and I thought of the members and how each of them has built a door out of pressure instead of a wall. I can feel their advice living in me like muscle memory now. I could hear Namjoon's voice in the quiet, protect the source and the river will run clear, and I let that sentence be the key that opened the morning. I could see Jin shaking his head like he was about to make a joke and then dropping it in favor of something truer, be slow on purpose. Speed is a disguise for fear. Yoongi's presence sat in the corners like the restful spaces in a good drum pattern, reminding me to leave room for breath. Hoseok's sunlight was under the door already, the promise that movement can be prayer. Jimin's hand on my shoulder was the permission I didn't know I still needed. Taeyoung's doorway cord lingered like a scent you can't name, something warm that tells you you're home. We tracked quietly, the kind of session that feels like threading a needle with your eyes closed and somehow getting it on the first try because you stopped trying to force it. I sang a line about a kitchen light catching 2 mugs and making a cathedral out of a plain morning, and I didn't overthink whether anyone would understand what I meant. The right people always understand when you tell the truth. It's an echo they already carry. Between takes, I caught myself imagining how a life learns to breathe under attention without becoming a spectacle. The answer kept returning in ordinary images that almost made me laugh with relief. Peeling fruit over the sink and not photographing the color. folding the shirts that get worn the most, not the ones that look best on a hanger, walking around the lake and letting the silence do most of the talking, buying a plant you're not sure you can keep alive and learning together what it needs. None of it is impressive and all of it is unforgettable if you're paying attention. My phone buzzed with a message from management, the kind that begins with a polite sentence and ends with a list of musts that sound like a weather forecast for someone else's climate. A brand wanted a certain shot on a certain date, a neat little moment people could share to prove their proximity to my life. I stared at the ask and felt the old reflex reach for the calendar with one hand and for a justification with the other. Then I heard the line I wrote 2 mornings ago float up like a lifeline. Generosity without boundaries is extraction wearing a friendly mask. I called instead of texting because I wanted my tone to do some of the work words can't. I said I was grateful. I said the schedule needed to bend, not me. I said the day in question already belonged to something that keeps me human. There was a pause on the other end. The kind where you can hear the machinery of another person's mind rearranging itself to accommodate a fact it would prefer to ignore. The answer came back soft but surprised. We'll find another time. I thanked them and hung up without explaining why the day was sacred. It's enough to know your own reasons. The sacred is not more sacred because you defended it in public. In the afternoon, I went to see a jeweler whose shop sits on a street that tourists forget after 3 blocks, a place where the door makes an old sound when it closes and the lights are warm like late autumn. I wasn't there to buy a ring. At least that's what I told myself. I was there to learn language. Metal has dialects and stones have moods and hands have histories, and I wanted to make sure the word I choose later will be fluent in the way we've decided to live. The woman behind the counter had eyes that smiled before her mouth did, and she didn't ask who I was or why I kept looking toward the window like a deer learning a path. She laid pieces down like sentences, not sales pitches, and taught me to see how a shape is a promise to treat weight with grace. She said, "Try this on," and I did, and it felt like holding a decision I'm not afraid of anymore. I left with nothing in my pocket but a new certainty and a sketch folded into force, soft at the corners from the way my thumb wouldn't leave it alone. On the sidewalk, the city felt less like a stage and more like a crowd of lives intersecting, each of us carrying a little private spark through the wind. My girlfriend met me at a cafe that doesn't specialize in anything except knowing how to leave you alone with the person you came to see, and we took the corner table that always feels like a secret agreement. We talked about something dumb we saw on television, and then about something serious we read last week, and then about who would cook and who would wash if we had exactly 30 minutes between a rehearsal and a call to family. We did not make plans that sound like promises to strangers. We made plans that feel like promises to ourselves. She told me she wants a home where music can play softly enough that you can hear a spoon rest on a saucer. And I laughed because I've spent most of my life turning the volume up to drown out the pressure. I told her I want a home where doors are shut most of the time, so openings feel like invitations, not obligations. She touched my wrist, a small press of skin to say, "I hear you." And I felt the day shift into something even quieter than morning, a chamber where the architecture is built out of ordinary sentences and the weight of them is perfect. On the walk back, we passed a group of students arguing about a film, all hands and eyebrows in delight. And I envied them for a second, the way you envy anyone who hasn't yet been asked to become a symbol. Then I realized the envy was misdirected. The cure for symbolhood isn't to wish you were unknown. Is to become someone whose private life is so well built that the public version can't swallow it. That realization felt like the kind of truth you only notice when you're doing something as simple as turning left at a crosswalk because the light told you to. And I tucked it away like a coin in a pocket for later. We stopped at a fruit stand and I picked up a pear that smelled like an evening in late summer. And she grinned and said, "You're going to write a song about that pear." And I said, maybe the song is just the eating of it. And we both liked that answer enough to buy 2. I got a message from the members, nothing dramatic, just a chain of tiny check-ins that always feel like a rope across a gap. Namjoon sent a photo of a page with a line underlined twice. Choose to be understood by the few who matter rather than admired by the many who don't know you. Jin sent a video of steam rising off ramen and then, as if he knew the jeweler's light still lived in my eyes, added, "When you're ready, pick the simple thing that will look like itself in 10 years. Yoongi sent a file that was only silence for 8 seconds and then a single kick like a heartbeat. And I laughed because he speaks fluent restraint. Hoseok sent a picture of a shadow doing an accidental dance on a wall and wrote, "Everything is choreography when your intention leads." Jimin wrote, "I can hear the calm in your words today. Keep it." And I did my best to obey. Taeyoung sent a close-up of a doorknob with a small scratch that looked like a star and said, "Even doors have constellations if you look close enough." I carried their messages like charms. Not as protection from the world, but as reminders of the world. I want to keep choosing. Evening tried to turn into the version of night that writes its own script for me. Airport, corridors, flashes, the sudden weight of a stranger's expectation, but I changed the scene with a decision that used to feel radical and now feels like responsibility. I turned off my phone for an hour. The silence didn't accuse me of anything. It didn't tally losses or narrate missed opportunities. It just became a room where music could practice walking around without needing shoes. I picked up the guitar and found the chord Taeyoung had sent me hiding under my fingers, and I followed it like a path through tall grass toward a melody that didn't want to be famous, only true. I sang to the wall and the wall didn't clap, and that was perfect. I think people forget this part exists for artists because the architecture of the industry rewards noise over nurture. But the work remembers. It knows when you made it in a quiet house to give to the one person who's going to hear it first while stirring soup. Before sleep, I called my parents again because repetition is one of the ways a family says we're still here. My mother asked if I was eating enough, and I told her about the pears, and she said, "Buy 3 next time in case one is secretly bruised." And I promised I would and meant it. My father told me he found an old recording of me humming into a phone at 2 in the morning. Proof that I have always loved the hour when the world forgets to pose. And I asked him to send it, not to post anywhere, but to keep like a stone you skip across a lake on a day when your hands need to remember what effortless feels like. After the call, I stood in the kitchen and filled a glass of water and watched the light catch it like a rehearsal for the way I want the rest of my life to behave. Simple things made luminous by attention, generous because they were allowed to be ordinary first. When I finally laid down, the room felt like a held breath at the end of a long note again. And I wondered how many times in the past I mistook that feeling for emptiness. It is not empty. It is a room clearing its throat to make space for the truth you kept chasing because you were afraid to sit down and receive it. The truth tonight was not complicated. I want to marry the woman I love when the time is right, and the promise can be kept in the exact language we speak to each other when the world isn't listening. I want to build a home that outlasts applause and turns the volume of gratitude into actions your hands can actually do. I want to keep making music with my brothers from a place that honors the life that makes the music worth making. I want to give you work that is the artifact of a soul intact. And I want to walk through a door I chose with calm in my chest and laughter close at hand, into a future that fits because I measured it against the kind of days that actually hold a life. The morning began with rain that sounded like someone practicing patience on the windowsill, a soft percussion that made the rooms feel closer together, and I took it as permission to let the day unfold without urgency. I brewed coffee and watched the spiral of steam untangle itself. And I thought about how a future is built not with declarations, but with habits that hold under weather. I set my phone down, face down, and let the quiet expand until it had a shape. The silence wasn't empty, it was a container. I imagine the life I keep sketching in the margins becoming the main text. Not because a headline demanded it, but because we kept showing up to the same table with the same small promises and kept them long enough that the table recognized us as its people. I pictured a calendar where the crowded squares are not proof of worth, but evidence of care. Each box that kept sanctuary hairpins in a dish by the door, low music before dinner, a walk even if the sky disapproved, ordinary as a prayer that worked. At the studio, I found the room smelling faintly of wood and old electricity, the way spaces do when they've been listening all night, and I laid down a slow pattern that felt like the rhythm of two mugs warming a kitchen counter. My voice settled low, as if it had been carrying a chair from one side of the room to the other, and finally put it down. The melody didn't ask to be famous. It asked to be true enough that I could hum it while hanging laundry and not feel like I was pretending to be anyone. I thought about the night outside the restaurant and how quickly a no can become a verdict in a stranger's story, and I turned the memory until it found its other face. A no is actually a yes to the life you're building. In the headphones, the drum made space like Yoongi always does air in the bar where breath belongs. I left the space there on purpose, a small porch, for the lyric to step out and look at the light before it speaks. Later, I met Namjoon in a corner of a bookstore where the poetry hides from performance, and he picked up a slim volume and thumbed through it like he was checking a pulse. We didn't talk about the machine of the week, only about lines that feel inevitable once you read them. The way truth sometimes arrives so simply, you're embarrassed you didn't notice it sooner. He said something about stewardship, again, not as a lecture, but as a reminder. Guard the aquifer and the well takes care of itself. I could feel the idea sink into me like a seed. We stood by the window while the rain rehearsed being rain, and I felt the gentlest kind of armor knitting itself across my day, made not of hardness but of clarity. Jin called right as I left and asked if I'd eaten, and the question always carries more than nutrition. It's a temperature check for the spirit. He sent a photo of a table he'd set for no one in particular, just a bowl and chopsticks and a little dish of pickles. And he said, it's good practice to set a place even when you're alone because it teaches you how to welcome the life you want before it arrives. I held the image in my chest like a match cupped against the wind. I've been setting places in my head for a while now. One for the woman I love, one for the sonata of laughter we haven't met yet, one for work that will take its shoes off at the door because it knows it's entering a home and not a stage. I'm learning to trust that readiness is its own kind of invitation. Hoseok met me later in a practice room that had mirrors on one wall and long shadows on the other, and he put on a track without asking what kind of day I'd had. He let movement ask the questions instead. I followed him not because I needed choreography, but because the body keeps secrets, the mind talks over, and sweat tells the truth in a language I can actually hear. We moved small, then smaller, and I felt the night of that shove fall off my shoulders like a jacket that never fit. He grinned and said, the smallest steps are often the most decisive. And I thought about the tiny choices that keep a relationship alive. Who takes the trash when the rain is rude, who apologizes first when the day made both of you sharp, who remembers the name of the clerk who always folds a bag just so. I want to be great at those steps more than I want applause for the ones under lights. He filmed a few seconds for me, not to post, but to study. And when I watched the replay, I saw a man who didn't look hurried. There was dignity in the pace. Sometimes that's the whole win. In the afternoon, I met her near a park where the trees look like they've been thinking for 100 years, and we walked the long way around a pond that knows too many secrets to be startled by ours. We talked about dumb things we love, because love needs dumb things to chew on. Serious meals require a little fruit after. She told me a story about a childhood neighbor who always wore a red hat, and I told her about a teacher who taught me to hum into a closet to hear what a room does to a voice. And I realized how often the thread of a future is woven from details that would never make it into a press release. We sat on a bench with paint flaking like a memory and didn't take a picture. That felt like a renovation you can't see from the street, but changes the way the house breathes. A message waited when we got up, polite pressure wearing its best clothes. Another request to turn a private hour into proof of gratitude. Another invitation to perform sincerity on a schedule. I felt the tug, and then I felt the counter pull. The anchor we've been installing together, one small bolt at a time. I typed slowly and chose the kindest words that still held their shape. I said, thank you, then said no, then said, here's where I can offer a yes and mean it. I didn't explain the why. The why belongs to the kitchen and to the park bench and to the rain practice window and to the 6 messages waiting in group chat that say, "We know you, keep going." The reply came back with more softness than I expected. People adjust when you demonstrate a boundary without turning it into a sermon. Sometimes the sermon is a wound looking for a crowd. We ducked into a grocery on the way home and argued about peaches again. Not because we needed fruit, but because repeating a gentle argument creates a groove where laughter can return later when the day is less generous. We bought a candle that smelled like an afternoon in late spring and promised to light it only on days we both cooked. And right there in aisle 4, we made a ritual that will never trend, but will hold more than any charting single ever could. Back at the apartment, I chopped onions while she stirred, and I thought of my parents telling me how a family is kept by things that don't need to be posted to exist. I called them on speaker, and my mother made me rotate the camera to check the color of the sauce, like she was approving a record master, and my father misremembered the name of a song, and we laughed in that way that stitches time back together. After dinner, I opened the box that is in the box again, the sketch from the quiet street with the old sounding door, and I traced the line that means promise. I tried to picture the moment all wrapped up in a spectacle, and the picture refused to come into focus. Then I pictured it in a room with no cameras, and the image arrived clean, just 2 people, and a sentence that only makes sense in the dialect we've been speaking on purpose, a yes that doesn't need subtitles, because we learned each other's mouths long before we asked them to hold new vowels. I put the sketch away because knowing is enough for now. Readiness is patient when it's the real kind. Night brought with it the temptation to doom scroll through versions of myself that people had constructed for sport, and I chose instead to scroll my own memory messages from the members over the last year that sounded like a chorus of anchors. Namjoon's paragraphs that never feel like lectures because they're written with respect for my agency. Jin's timing that turns a kitchen into a cathedral. Yoongi's minimalism that leaves a doorway in every beat for breath. Hoseok's light that moves like a hand blessing the day. Jimin's soft insistence that my worth isn't a debate to hold in public. Taeyoung's angles that find beauty where the eye forgot to look. I read them again and again until my breathing matched the tempo of the room. When the city quieted, I sat with the guitar and let the new song walk around without shoes. And I understood something I've been circling for weeks. The life I want with her does not compete with the life I have with you. It completes it. The work is better when the person making it isn't running on fumes or on fear of disappointing strangers. The shows are warmer when the morning before them belonged to a kitchen and a walk and a shared joke no one else would understand. The gratitude is truer when it isn't trying to pay down a debt that doesn't exist. I don't want to perform being a good man. I want to be one in the kinds of ways that leave no digital residue and still change the weather in the rooms that matter. Before sleep, I wrote one sentence on a new card and taped it beside the others where my eye can't avoid them in the morning. Protect the hours that make you someone you're proud to bring to the stage. I turned off the light and felt the room hold me the way a chord holds its note after the fingertip lifts. The resonance, a quiet proof that the sound was real. Tomorrow will have its demands and its surprises and its little storms at the door. But tonight the house knew our names, and the future wasn't something to defend. It was a lamp left on for us to find our way back to. Steady as breath, simple as 2 mugs cooling on a counter we wiped down together. Certain as the rain that taught the day to speak softly and still be heard.